I Am Interchange. This is the Hatch podcast series. Can you hear me? I'm Tate Chamberlin, and I'm in Quito, Ecuador this week. Join me as I head deep into the Ecuadorian Amazon. Scattered sparsely across the Colombian and Peruvian borders reside the indigenous people of the Quichua Nation, with more than 400 organized communities comprised of alias, groups of families. The Quichua clans currently retain the rights to over 1,115,000 hard-won hectares in and around the rainforest, and they're mere minor landowners. After working and communing with Quichua activist Leo Cerda for several days in his home village, we ventured back out of the verdant depths to meet esteemed Amazon Watch co-founder and fellow activist Atosa Soltani in the urban center of Quito to discuss the past, present, and future of the Amazon, the thrumming, thumping heart of the planet. Welcome, everybody, to the Hatch Podcast. I'm Tate Chamberlin. I'm in Quito, Ecuador, with Atosa Soltani and Leo Cerda. Welcome, you two.
Great to be on. Thank you for having us.
Hi.
I've spent the week with you.
We have.
What kind of toys did you have growing up?
I don't know. I had a lot of rocks. That I used to play with. In Ecuador, like, a lot of people have volleyball and football tournaments, and my uncles have won many of these trophies. And on top of these trophies, you'll have these figures like angels or like it's soccer person. I don't know, that were attached to these soccer trophies that will have won. And they all were at my grandma's house. So I basically destroy all their trophies to take the top part where this figure was, and I will go and play out in my grandma's garden with rocks. Those were my main toys, I guess.
I think I had a couple of dolls. One of them even made sounds when you pushed a button, like a baby crying.
Okay.
I was also a little bit of a tomboy. I was kind of both. I had the dolls, and then I had, toys to play with my male cousins in the streets, various kinds of balls and bats and things like that.
Yeah, good. How did you earn your first dollar? I know you're from Iran. I'm not sure currencies. I just use the dollar as kind of a basic.
I worked at Wendy's when I moved to the United States and I turned 16. I got a job selling, doing fast food for a few months.
Wendy's is a good one. I did Burger King.
Oh my God. Growing up, I had these are my two, the first one, my father had this place where he would receive tourists. So I will make the bets, and that's how I earn my dollar, I remember. And the other way was we'll pick up corn and we'll sell the corn. And I was I don't want to do this. He was if you want money, you have to pick up the corn, and then we'll go into the city, we'll sell it, and that's your money for the week. Because when you go to school, you need money to buy candy or whatever. That was the first thing. The second most real job out in the world, my mom's friend hired me to go clean something out of her house. And then I went there and I got fired on the first day because I didn't know how to use a machete. I didn't know how to do any of these things. So she basically fired me on the spot because I didn't know how to do any of those things. Yeah.
Did you eventually learn how to use the machete?
I have. That is not one of my best things. I feel when I was a kid, my grandfather would force us. Not force us, you had to do it. In the community setting, you have to know how to do all of this thing. And I got tired of it. And growing up, I was I'm not going to do anything. Because in my house, it was you either study or you have to go work the land like everyone else. So I loved studying. I loved learning so many different things. And my parents will allow me to study and not having those hard work jobs. So that was my thing.
Will you tell me a little bit about where you're from?
Sure. I was born in Iran, and in the late 70s during the revolution, my parents were worried that I was not going to be able to get an education because women were being harassed, and girls were, didn't look like there was going to be much of an opportunity for girls and young girls. And so my parents shipped me off to Akron, Ohio, to my uncle, who was had been living in the States since the 50s, and he was a heart surgeon. And so he received my sister and I during turmoil in Iran. And so that's how I arrived there. And grew up in Ohio, eventually moved to Los Angeles, and ended up in the Amazon, working in 1990, starting with, traveling to learn about the rainforest, and then finding myself in this role. And so it's been quite a few years since 1990.
Yeah, it has. You've had a very strong trajectory.
Thanks.
I was born in the Amazon at my grandma's place. My mom comes from like a small town in the Amazon, and my dad comes from a very small village that now is 120 people in the village. So it's very, very small. And my grandfather was a healer for the village. So my dad, since they didn't have high school in the village, he moved to Tena. He met my mom. He and my mom moved to the village, and they had all of us there. And we sort of moved in between the village and the small town that's now called Tena. So yeah, that was beautiful. Next to the rivers, forest, family, village, life, good.
It was beautiful. I got to visit it with you this week, and met a decent amount of your family, and it was good. I saw you use the machete a little bit.
I was posing mostly. Yeah, they made you work. Like, you basically have to work and like support the Minga, like the collective work that they did. We were like cleaning the communal areas because we have our festivities this upcoming week, and everybody from the whole village had to go and help out. So I did my bit.
Leo, as a member of the Quichua, will you tell me a little bit about your role and the projects within activism right now?
What is my role in my village? I feel like I have different roles. One role has been part of the village and supporting the village because indigenous communities have not have the access to health services, education services from the government. And me sort of having like this duality, this life, like growing up in the village and also growing up in the town with my mom's family side, they pushes through education really, really hard. So I basically use my platform to support my village to get access to the basic things they should have, like education, health, and now to protect our land against fossil fuel extraction and mining. That is being one of the biggest things for indigenous communities in Ecuador. That is for my village. And then for my nation, I feel like there are so few advocates for our nation as Quichua people, as people from the Amazon, to speak out against the government and go around the world to talk about what is happening in the Amazon, to talk about our livelihoods, to propose different alternatives and projects for our communities, and being this like bridge for my community or for my nation to the world and vice versa.
Atosa, you're the founder of Amazon Watch. You've moved on since then, but will you tell me a little bit about your trajectory with that and what kind of projects that you're working on right now?
Sure. So Amazon Watch, I would say I founded Amazon Watch, or it found me in 1996. It's an organization that works throughout the Amazon basin in all countries of the Amazon basin to protect territories and rights, working in close partnership with indigenous peoples. And we are, I continue to serve the organization as a president of the board. I was the executive director for 18 years, and it was truly where I had the privilege and honor to work with indigenous cultures all over Latin America and work on basically fighting the destructive development, human rights violations, oppression, economic policies that are basically life blind, that are consuming and destroying the forest, work on legal cases and land rights cases, on campaigns to hold corporations accountable, investors, basically sending signals to investors, financial institutions, multilateral banks, and governments that they need to basically respect indigenous rights, protect the forest, and basically change the way they see the Amazon. So that work continues. Amazon Watch continues to do amazing work and growing and developing deep long-term partnerships with indigenous peoples and frontline communities, and supporting those communities, not just when it's, a moment of conflict, but over long periods of time. And, so I learned a lot in that work, and I continue to serve the organization in every way I can. But, I just didn't want to be executive director anymore. I wanted to spend more time in the forest. I wanted to listen more. I wanted to, basically work on seeing what needed to emerge next. What emerged next was a series of conversations with leaders that I'd worked on for many years in the communities here in Ecuador and Peru. And what we saw is that, while we were having some success fighting, this pipeline and this oil project or this mine, we were, defeating these projects often. We were having success, but like zombies, these projects kept coming back to life every, 4 or 5 years later. Some new company, the same oil project, the same mine, the same dam, but under a different management, right? And so we really felt like, we needed to work also not just this one place at a time, one battle at a time, which had been how we'd been working, but really looking at how do we build movements, how do we strengthen alliances, and how do we support what needed to come next. And a lot of the people I talked to in this period back in 2016, 15, 16, were basically saying, we're really good at saying no. Here's what we don't want. But when it comes down to saying what is it we stand for, how do we articulate our vision, our solutions in coherent ways that are compelling and can address the big questions of our economic system, our governance system. And so we started working across the border in Ecuador and Peru at what we call now the sacred headwaters of the Amazon. Many of the rivers that are the headwaters of the Amazon that are source of the Amazon River begin right here in the glaciers in Ecuador and flow all the way down to Peru, and then, flow with other rivers and form the Amazon River. Here in the headwaters, we saw that there was already a lot of alliances. Indigenous peoples were already working together to stop new oil rounds, new mining concessions. So we began to work in basically what is now an indigenous-led alliance that covers an area the size of the state of Oregon in Ecuador and northern Peru. And the goal has been, first, strengthen all the organizations that are working in this landscape and help facilitate the coming together of organizations to articulate their common vision for the future of the headwaters. We did a lot of analysis that showed, even though we were defeating these oil projects, the plans on the books for this bioregion is something like 80% of this area is threatened by oil drilling, mining, logging, roads, dams, agriculture. And so we decided we needed a comprehensive, strategy. So the first strategy, as I said, was to strengthen organizations, create alliances. Then what emerged was that there needed to be a vision, articulation of a vision for the future. So we worked together on building a bioregional plan for the permanent protection of this region. And that's where it brings me to today. We moved from dreaming together, building alliances, to now saying, okay, what is it going to take to implement this vision for the permanent protection of the Amazon? And again, to give, realizing that we're not going to win one place at a time, that really we needed to work on a grander scale, at a larger scale, at the level of the entire watershed. So the Napo watershed, the Pastaza watershed into the Marañón, that triangle of rivers and forests is now the bioregion of the sacred headwaters. So that's what I'm doing now, is just deeply listening to local organizations and local indigenous peoples to basically figure out how to bring to fruition their visions for the permanent protection of their territories.
And bridging that network of them to make a more powerful coalition.
Exactly. The alliance right now has, there are 30 nations that are part of this alliance, and 26 indigenous organizations are members of the governing council that meet a couple times a year to make decisions about priorities. And those are, the idea is that they have common threats and they have common solutions. And how do the work we do now help strengthen the cohesive alliance that's working to protect this area? In some ways, it's about lifting one another up. There are areas that are stronger, areas that are weaker. How do they lift each other up? How do they establish shared, vision around economic activity, around collective rights, around governance, territorial governance, around land rights and land tenure? Those are all things that all indigenous peoples are facing. And so the idea of the alliance is to help support and lift everyone's boat, basically.
Will the two of you give me an overview of the Amazon? I know it's kind of broad, but just help us key in on this.
The Amazon is in like 9 countries in South America, so it's very diverse in terms of nations, visions, wisdom, bioregions, and biodiversity. And there are like countries that have more access to like ocean. The Amazon River goes all the way to the Atlantic. And it's very different, very diverse, but at the same time, we all face similar problems, as indigenous people, not only in the Amazon, but around the globe. We've faced colonization, destruction of our lands. We don't have land rights, land tenure, because of the government. So we have like this beautiful biodiverse mega region. At the same time, we have this region that is impacted by fossil fuel extraction, mining, timber. And I think we, as it does said, like we need to look at as a bioregion in a way that the more the merrier, the more like we can accomplish things. But at the same time, the Amazon is located in 9 different countries, and that makes a huge difference. For example, in Ecuador, we had land rights and the agrarian law. In Brazil and in Peru, most of the indigenous peoples in the Amazon do not have land rights, and it is so difficult to see like the different realities in the Amazon. And I feel like each case should be analyzed properly, individually, so we can support. And I think like the way we want to support, I think it's been changing. In the 60s, a lot of the organizations were super paternalistic. They didn't know what to do and how to invest in indigenous people, how to create capacity. And I think I come from like the second generation where my parents, when my grandfather started working in indigenous rights, my grandfather is one of the founders of the indigenous movement of Ecuador, and then we have my mom that was into education. And then it's me, like the third generation that is being educated, that knows different languages, that has access to platforms and things, and how to manage that, and how to leverage that to supporting our communities. And I think now we're facing so many problems with the world as it is. And as the new generation, we're trying to find ways to support our communities in terms of policy making, in terms of creating an alternative to fossil fuel extraction, in terms of navigating this first century world while having that connection to our spiritual world, to our land, to our territories, and how to love them and how to protect them, by also living in this world that is crazy and CGI and artificial intelligence and microchips and fast fashion. So it is a dichotomy that we as indigenous people have to live within.
So, just to say some more about building on what Leo mentioned, the Amazon basin, for listeners who might be in other parts of the world, you think of it as a vast green ocean the size of the continental United States. I've been part of contributing author to the science panel for the Amazon, and the scientific community came together to assess the importance of the Amazon in the global system. And it calls it, basically, the science panel calls the Amazon a regional entity of the biosphere. And it's the big word. Basically, for many decades, people called the Amazon the lungs of the earth, in the way that the forest breathes in CO2 and breathes out oxygen. And that's true, the forest does that. But what is less known is that the Amazon is also functions, like indigenous peoples always said, the Amazon is the heart of the world. And finally, scientists are saying, the Amazon is actually the heart of the hydrological climatic system of the biosphere, in the way that the Amazon basically cycles water and moisture in a way that, first bringing in moisture from the atmosphere. The Amazon beckons moisture from the atmosphere. It rains over the forest. The forest, through the trees that evapotranspire, lift water vapor back up into the air in form of moisture and vapor. You can see it flying over the forest. You see these basically geysers of moisture rising from the forest, from the trees. On average, one tree will evapotranspire or sweat out 1,000 liters of water vapor per day per tree. You have 400 billion trees in the Amazon, so you have these trees that cycle the water that comes in from the east to west, and keep cycling the water vapor until it reaches the Andes, and then these atmospheric rivers that are formed by these geysers from the trees end up bringing rain deeper and deeper into the continent of South America. And when it hits the Andes, some of those atmospheric rivers go all the way to North America, where scientists say that some of the moisture content, factors that determine moisture content in the Sierra Nevada, for example, in the California mountain range, are determined in part by rainfall patterns in the Amazon. So literally, if you watch, time-lapse photography from the space station looking at the Amazon pumping rain and water, it is like a heart, beating heart. And that beating heart is bringing moisture not only into 95% of the rain that falls in South America comes from the Amazon, but some of that rain actually hits north and brings productive rain to the North Continent too, to Mexico and U.S. Southwest and California. Now, just to give you the size, I said the size of continental United States, the Amazon River has the highest volume of any river on the world. And just to give you in scale, at the mouth of the Amazon, the amount of water that comes out of the mouth of the Amazon is equal to the combined flow of the 6 next largest rivers on the planet combined. So if you took 6 largest, after the Amazon River, the next 6 largest rivers in the world, combine them, you just get to the flow of the Amazon. And the amount of water that's coming out of the Amazon, mouth of the Amazon, is only half the picture. The river in the sky, that the forest lifts up into the sky every day, the Sky River, is 20% bigger than the Amazon River. So between what comes out of the mouth of the Amazon and what comes out of the trees of the Amazon, you literally have this beating heart that's driving weather and rainfall across the planet. And the trees, as I said, are key to that. And what's happening is, so far, scientific consensus is that when you lose between 20 and 25% of the tree cover in a particular forest, that cycling effect, where the trees lift up the rain, and the rain falls and the tree lifts back up. That cycling effect of regenerating, recirculating the rain diminishes. And so once you get to a threshold of around 25%, you can tip. It's called the tipping point of no return. The forest can then tip and generate less and less rain over time and die back. And so what we have in the Amazon today is that we've already lost, between what's been totally denuded and what's been degraded, we've lost 26% of the tree cover of the Amazon basin on 9 countries. And what we have is we've reached the tipping point of no return. Now, it might take 70 years or so for the forest to die back, but something like 70% of the rainforest could die back, and the Amazon could turn into a massive savanna. And that's where we are now. The tipping point is now. The time that it takes for the forest to become a savanna might take 70 years, but the tipping point is now. So with every tree that falls, we are basically getting further away from being able to have a stable system that's been around for 10 million years. That's why it's urgent. That's why we have to protect and restore 80% of the tree cover of the Amazon, of the forest ecosystems. Now, when you think about indigenous peoples, there are over 500 distinct indigenous peoples in the Amazon with their own language and culture and land and history and territory, and maybe more, but those are some of the numbers we work with today. And their territories are currently the amount of course, once they held all the territories in the Amazon, but today the territories that they are stewarding, that they either have title to or they're becoming, that are governing through their traditional practices, is about 1/3 of the Amazon. So 1/3 of the Amazon basin is indigenous lands. And when you look at studies of satellite imagery, you see that deforestation rates in indigenous territories is even less than national parks. So, indigenous peoples are doing a really fantastic job of being true guardians of the rainforest. And so that's, and they have rights, collective rights. They have collective, and also they have knowledge systems of how to live in harmony with the forest. The other myth about the rainforest is that the Amazon is this intact system, this intact wilderness. But what we know from current satellite data and also other kinds of investigations, what we're seeing is that the Amazon basin is actually this beautiful interweave between wild forests and cultivated gardens. Indigenous peoples practiced, and as you went to the chakra in Leo's community, you saw that they have shifting agroforestry practices where they, use diverse set of plants to grow their food systems, and then every 8 or 10 years they would leave that plot to grow back and go to a new plot. Those small disturbances over thousands of years created, this cultivated mixed with wild biodiversity, to where indigenous peoples' presence in the Amazon enhanced plant biodiversity, which is not something we usually associate with human presence. So indigenous peoples have knowledge systems about maintaining and enhancing biodiverse forests in a harmonious way. And so they have a lot to teach us. And as we talk about how to protect and restore 80% of the Amazon urgently between now and 2025 is actually what we have to do with very little time. As we do that, we have to look to indigenous peoples to guide us because they are actually doing it. And in part, that knowledge system is key to also understanding the interactions between weather, seasons, migration patterns of animals, and basically how to continue to see the vibrant forest. And I would say that, for me, it's been an incredible honor to do this work and to continue to learn from indigenous peoples. But today, we can't just expect indigenous peoples to do the work. They're on the front lines, and often Leo can maybe speak a little bit more about your, the work that's happening now in Napo with the mining, but they're on the front lines, literally putting their bodies on the line. But really, their other 60% are, 70% of the Amazon that's non-Indigenous needs to get with the program, because the future of all of humanity will depend on learning how to coexist and how to care for this biodiverse system.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I usually say, like, we need to indigenize the world. We need to go back to those practices. When we talk about land back, or a lot of people think, like they want to take this away from us. No, I feel like we want to take you back to this indigenous value system that makes you want to protect the land, want to know about your territory, want to have a relationship with the planet. I feel like humanity in general has dehumanized itself and going as further away as possible from nature, from their connection they have to the planet. And the only thing the humans have left of humanity is indigenous wisdom and indigenous people that have this a special connection to their territory, but the stewardship of the planet as well. So I feel like we as humanity need to go back to be those humans that we want to be, in terms of the relationship with the planet and the protection of the world. The further away we go, we think about destruction and that we are this and nature is that. So therefore we can colonize it, tear apart, extract it. And I feel like what we need these days is that shift in, like, going back to the roots. It's like going back to the indigenous knowledge system to safeguard the forest. Not only the Amazon, the forests of the world where indigenous people exist. What is happening to indigenous people in the Amazon, it's similarly happening to people in Australia, indigenous people in Australia, indigenous people in the US and Canada, First Nations, all of us, because we have been like safeguarding the planet. So now, in order to move forward, what are we going to do as a society to disrupt this and move forward to rethink the future we want to live in by these values? And I think that's where the work that Atos is doing, that I'm doing, that a lot of organizations are doing, it's about rethinking, going back to basics, working on these projects with indigenous communities. Like, there's no future without indigenous wisdom. And each community, each part of the world is its own. So I think we have to go region by region, community by community, trying to achieve these goals in order to have a future for the next generation. I feel like one of the things that devastates me as a young person is that, like, growing up, I grew up in my village, which was so beautiful, pristine water of the Yanganates Reserve. On the other side of the Cotopaxi volcano, beautiful. We just drink the water from the river. We play in our forest. Like, now, a kilometer away from my house, they're destroying. Literally, they're poisoning our water. They're poisoning our land. They're using mercury. They're like killing people in order to extract gold. And they're mining the sacred headwaters of the Amazon with mercury. And like all these communities that live along the Napo River, that live along the Amazon River, are being poisoned. And that is so crazy to see. Why? Because of the hunger that the world have in terms of extracting our natural resources, in terms of gold, in terms of not thinking how to transition properly to an economy that is not based on fossil fuel extraction and destruction of minerals and destruction of timber and destruction of indigenous sacred lands and territories. So now what we have to do as a society is rethink, how are we going to move away from that? How are we going to present governments, local governments, international governments, in terms of preservation, no-go zones, no more extraction, how to transition from that extractive productive matrix into a new energy matrix based on sustainability, based in low carbon emissions, based in new energy consumptions, new technologies that will still support the planet to survive and still support society. But as a society, we need to consume less, do other things. I think we have the money. We have the money as the world to move away from fossil fuels, to move away from extracting the blood of the planet, from extracting the minerals of the planet. How are we going to do that? And I think there are many projects. Right now in my community, we're facing mining. Other community, a lot of community, more than 500 communities in all over Latin America have more than 1,500 new mining concessions in Latin America in the past 2 years. And we say we're transitioning, for example, the government of Ecuador, he went to Glasgow 2 years ago, and the president said, yes, Ecuador is transitioning to a green economy. And then we come back to Ecuador and they have 150 new mining concessions just in my area, in Tena, in the Amazon. It's how do you think that? It's one thing that you have to act the walk. And as citizens of the world, I think we need to make sure the people that we elect have our backs in terms of zero waste, no contamination, especially in Black, Brown, Indigenous communities, because we are the most affected and we are the forefront of the fight. Instead of concentrating ourselves on education, on living, we have every day to fight for our lives, to fight for our families, to fight for our territories that have been poisoned every day, 24/7. So that is something we need to think and rethink as a society. How are we going to move forward?
I'm curious, Atosa, you said that 70% of the land within the Amazon is owned by non-Indigenous communities. Why does the land keep getting sold off? And I'm curious who owns the debt for that.
So back to sort of saying that the economic system that has flourished in the Amazon comes from a worldview that only saw the Amazon as this vast storehouse of riches. If you think about the colonization that happened here back in the 1500s, people came with this idea of the myth of El Dorado to look for gold and to find, and they found black gold, oil, and they had this vision of the Amazon as this empty space, even though somewhere between 12 and 18 million indigenous peoples occupied the continent. It was seen as vast areas to be occupied and dominated and conquered, a green hell that needed to be tamed, to see the riches of the Amazon as the and then progressing into more of a modern world post-World War II, when there was this big push to develop, and the word development became the excuse for continued colonization. And then development was let's help alleviate poverty. Let's push for progress. This concept of progress, which was the motto of the governments, the military governments of Brazil back in the 60s. Order and progress, to dominate, occupy, and progress and extract and find riches, for the benefit of nation states, for nation states to grow, but also for the benefit of supposedly poverty alleviation. Development became this kind of thing that got imposed. We need development. What is development? It was mostly development in order to facilitate large-scale extraction of resources for global markets. Whether it was rubber at one point, or, then it was, oil and timber and gold. And now, it's the new wave of the same things, soybean, and then Brazil got into cattle. If you look at the economy that has flourished in this continent, has been primary materials, raw materials, exports of natural resources, and mostly held by in small oligarchies, where there isn't true democracy. So decisions are favoring big corporations and big landowners and these big interests, economic interests. So the best decision for all is not necessarily what happens. What you have is an economic system that is extractive, that leaves behind huge disaster zones and ignores the true value, the true wealth. Partly what we need to do is look at how the true wealth of the Amazon is that it is the rain machine for the planet. It's the storehouse of biodiversity, cultural diversity, knowledge. There's only, if you look at how much, only about 5% of plant species in the Amazon basin have been cataloged. The fact that we're destroying species that we don't even yet know, that we haven't even documented, is a tragedy. It's like taking the crown jewels of planet Earth and, seeing someone compared it to let's take Notre Dame and break it down to bricks in order to build a road with the bricks of Notre Dame, for example. That's what we're doing. Now, part of the reason is, like you said, the economic system is extractive and it doesn't take into account the true cost of the activities that are perpetuated. But part of it is that these countries, the majority of all of these Amazonian countries, have a debt to GDP ratio of 60 to 100%. Means that their external debt that they owe to the World Bank and the IMF and the Swiss banks and all the other international creditors and the multilaterals and governments, bilateral debt, exceed either 60 to 100% of their GDP. In the case of countries like Ecuador, the amount of money that these countries pay every year in terms of just interest on their external debt is as much, equal roughly to the amount of money they make from drilling for oil or mining. So they're just mortgaging the Amazon just to break even on the interest on the debt, not to even pay the principal. The way the financial system is now is forcing countries, biodiverse countries like the ones in the Amazon, to mortgage the Amazon and to liquidate the Amazon in order to just stay afloat in a Ponzi game of compounded interest, where these countries end up paying 10x or 20x the original principal. Sometimes they never get to pay off the principal. It's just criminal how we have to dismember the vital organs of planet Earth, the vital organs of the biosphere, in order to stay financially solvent. It's, who makes this money? Where is this money going? And how is it that we're not looking at the liabilities that are left behind by these activities, the externalities? When Chevron drilled for Texaco, then Chevron drilled for oil in northern Amazon, they left behind massive toxic waste pits. An area 3 times the size of Manhattan was left full of toxic waste pits. 1,400 people died. Huge, indigenous cultures ended up getting on the verge of extinction. Several of the indigenous nations there. There was massive cancer plumes. Groundwater's contaminated. 2.5 million acres of rainforest were totally devastated. Gone. Completely gone. Countless species went extinct. The toxic waste spills and the drilling byproducts were never cleaned up. In fact, these systems were designed to pollute in order to save a few dollars a barrel. And the benefit, the billions of dollars that were made off of this oil, and then the companies bought and sold, the investment funds bought and sold increased in value and those values compounded. The people who got wealthy now are multi-billionaires that were principals of those companies. And this is the unjust financial system that is basically killing the planet, killing the biosphere. And of course, part of the solution is to really look at how there's a huge ecological debt that these extractive industries and these big wealth funds that made money from the extraction owe for the restoration, regeneration, reparation of all the harm they caused. So there's got to be money coming back to pay the ecological debt, to pay reparations, and to pay for the cleanup and restoration of the ecosystem that have been damaged. Plus, we have to stop doing more harm. We have to change our economic model from a life-blind extractive model to a more life-seeing, true wealth accounting, true cost accounting, true wealth, seeing true wealth, which is in standing forests, in biodiversity, in flow of fresh water, clean air. Those are the true things that we need that are also the fundamentals of a healthy economy. We need to change our focus from the focus on GDP growth to focus on well-being of all life and ecological integrity of the life support systems of the planet. So the ecological integrity of the Sacred Headwaters bioregion, the ecological integrity of the Amazon biome, the ecological integrity of our coral reefs and our mangroves. Those are the measures of true wealth, and we just need to change the economic model from one that aligns financial prosperity with ecological flourishing and human well-being. And we haven't gotten there. It's a puzzle that we're working on, but I think there are lots of great examples from indigenous communities of where that happens. We were just in the Atra village visiting the chakra of an area that an Atra woman takes care of. The women take care of the gardens there. And our group was asking, well, there's a lot of bugs, insects that eat your crops. So how do you account for pest control? How do you control the pests to get, to get the yield you need from your crops? And she said, well, we just factor in that half of everything we produce is for the insect world. We just factor that in. So it's like this idea that we create a world that works for all life. And in our mindset, we would say, we've got to eradicate the bugs and get the maximum yield. What they're saying, what's actually more sustainable is to feed everything, ourselves and all life. So I think we go back to what Leo was saying about indigenous principles, indigenous wisdom. I've been really reflecting a lot on that. The fact that 80% of the world's biodiversity and over 60% of the world's intact forests are in control of indigenous peoples, that are in stewardship of indigenous peoples. And you say, well, why? And I think that why is in part from the things that Leo and his grandparents taught them, which is that the first thing is to be a good ancestor to future generations. And another is to see the earth as your mother and life as sacred. And our role here is to be in reciprocity, which means we take as much as we give, if not more. And that is the woman in the garden in the Atra territory was saying, half is for the insects. We give as much as we take. And so those are the principles the modern world needs to really think about how to be good ancestors and what's true wealth. How do we recognize that the earth is a living system, the earth she's alive, and that in this living superorganism, we can be productive cells or we can be destructive cells, and that ultimately it's our common future. So we got to wake up before, we all perish. And so that's where the challenge is, to find a way to speak to decision makers and people in power, to make them see that we need to change the economic system. We actually need to really rethink wealth and refocus our progress from GDP growth to basically well-being index. The idea of having, some countries have already started, Costa Rica, Canada, Ireland, New Zealand, started doing their decision-making and budgeting and economic policies based on enhanced well-being. Bhutan chose the happiness index. How do we create decisions that increase people's well-being, emotional well-being, financial and economic, but also health and emotion, happiness, and so Indigenous peoples. The thing that I hear more frequently than anything is this idea of harmony, the idea of living in harmony, and it's what nature does. And I think we think of it, we overthink it maybe, but if we looked at a forest, if we looked at an ecosystem, the lessons would be there. The lessons around living in harmony would be all around us. They are all around us. We just have to have new eyes to see.
I feel like I'm still hopeful for the future of the planet because I feel like this is truly a collective effort. In indigenous communities, we do everything collective. We take care of our families collective. We take care of our land collectively. We take care of our resources collectively. And I think as humanity, this truly is a collective work for individuals, businesses, governments to really enhance, our collective effort in order to have a planet to live. The Paris Agreement, we have to stay well below 2 degrees Celsius. How are we going to accomplish that? How are we going to accomplish net zero by 250? Is 250 too far along? Now we are demanding radical change by 2030. How are we going to do that? And I think by dreaming together, by working together, we're doing things collectively. I am excited about AI. A lot of people are very, I don't know, they have mixed feelings about AI. And I think one of the things that I recently read in an article is that why don't we think about universal income? For humanity, humanity is thinking about, we're going to lose all these jobs and there's not going to be jobs for humans. Good. If we don't have jobs, there's so many billionaires in the planet that they don't need to have this humongous amount of money. How are we going to use these new technologies in order to support indigenous lands, to support the protection of the planet, to support businesses that thrive in net zero solutions? And I think as humanity, we need to start really thinking about how to use these new technologies in order to support the planet and also to support the protection of the planet as humanity. And that's why I feel personally, I'm excited about what the future holds with the new development of technologies. What are we finding in order to low carbon emissions, low fossil fuel consumption? What are these technologies? I think we have the wealth in the planet in order to rethink that, change the order of capitalism, use new technologies, protect indigenous knowledge, protect indigenous wisdom, but also protect humanity. Humanity that people don't need 2, 3 cars, 4 cars. We need a house to live. We need clean water. We need clean air. We need families thriving. And that's, I think, what we need to start looking at. And I think a lot of people are thinking the ideas, and we just need to commit ourselves, commit our communities, and commit governments to truly take that and be the change we want to see. And I feel that's why I work I work with my community, and I work with in different projects promoting this kind of changes that we want to see. Really, in going from fast fashion to upcycle, going from fossil fuel extraction and gas to solar power. We have those technologies. We just need to break the wall.
What gives me hope is people like Leo, young people, indigenous youth especially, who are telling compelling stories, activating their communities and defending their communities, but also speaking to solutions, and screaming louder than anyone at the climate meetings. It's really amazing to see indigenous peoples and young people in particular. And I would say the other part of this is the rise of women in politics, in corporations, in local governments and NGOs, and the fact that women are important to the debates around the future of the planet. They understand it at some deeper level, cellular level, and empowering women has also really been fantastic to see. We see, for example, when I look around all the rainforest protection organizations, it's really inspiring to see how many women are in those organizations leading the way. And then to see the women in the Amazon standing up sometimes to the men who may have, lost their strength of resisting, and they're the ones who are often holding the line too. So yeah, I agree with Leo that we have the technology, we have also new frameworks. We've had these frameworks, principles of ecological literacy that help us see our own, sort of see ourselves as we're not fighting for nature, we are nature defending itself. And all of us who are doing this work are actually part of the collective intelligence of the earth defending itself. So really, I do also feel like the work at the Sacred Headwaters has been really awesome, because it's been about amplifying voices of the solutions from the ground. And of course, we need to elect people who get it too. Let's not forget, we need to exercise our democracy muscles and really push for leadership that gets it.
I want to be sensitive to our time. I've got 4 more questions.
Okay.
How far should activism go?
I think we need to be on the streets, but also because the fight you win on the streets, if you want radical change, systemic change, you have to do it on the streets. But at the same time, I think we need to propose policy change. There are 2 types of work. And I feel like I've been on the streets, but at the same time, I went to a school for public policy to understand the policy, what is the failure of the policy, and how is that impacting and affecting indigenous territories. Because we are not in that realm, and we have not been educated in policy making and policy change, and also being at the policy making processes and spaces. And I think there is a space for debate, but there's things that are not debatable. Human rights, our territories, our water, that's not debatable. If we have to go to the streets, we have to go to the streets. And my thinking is that we have to go to the streets with a proposal for the government, and we have been clear on the demands that we're asking the government in Ecuador. We're talking about water, the protection of the water sources, not only for indigenous people, but for the entire country of Ecuador. We need to protect the water sources from contamination, because Ecuador will no longer have water. We need to protect indigenous lands and territories. We are suggesting no-go zones. Why don't you fix the oil extraction sites that you already have instead of giving more concessions? Why don't you make more productivity on those? Because the government is saying, we are working for development. There has been no development. You have to better your practices. You have to do free, prior, informed processes with indigenous communities. You have to have the environmental licenses. You have to ask indigenous people before concessioning of our lands and territories. Why don't they go to government officers and contaminate their pools, their water systems, and violent, defeat their families and impact their families. They won't do that in their gated communities. And why are they doing it to us? That's why I think we are protesting on the streets and also proposing policy change that we need to have. And we are also proposing alternatives to fossil fuel extraction. We're talking about local economies, local communal economies. Investing in capacity building for indigenous communities is investing in the capacity for the world to renew itself. I think that is my position.
Totally agree with Leo. I would say, we have to organize, and to be organized, we also have to get creative. Often that requires being in the streets and multiple strategies. We have to be in the streets protesting. My personal belief is the power of nonviolent direct action is profound in basically crystallizing the path towards justice. We also have to involve myriad diverse communities, from mothers to grandmothers to young people to the churches to investors to people who get it, because we have to break this. It shouldn't just be up to the youth or the indigenous frontline communities. It should be all of our shared responsibility. We are one human family. And we also have to work in the courts. We have to enforce laws, and we have to fight for stronger laws and policies. And we also have to change investment patterns. We have to be influencing the markets, sending signals to investors of what's risky, where they should be, where they should not be. The way that majority of the investments in coal has pretty much disappeared. Same thing with oil. We need to basically make it untenable to invest in new oil production, new fields, new capacity, new pipeline. We have to basically make it also culturally and morally and ethically wrong, as well as legally. And I would say that we have to create consciousness that sees humans as basically responsible for the demise or the continuation of life on the planet. We have to be responsible ancestors. We have to think about the rights of nature. One time we were okay with slavery. We were okay with, not having women vote or own property or be considered. We didn't even give indigenous peoples the right to vote in the United States till much after we gave women the right to vote. So we now know indigenous peoples have rights, women have rights, animals have rights. So the next frontier of our mental frameworks around rights need to be the rights of nature, the rights of future generations, and the rights of all life to continue to exist and produce its vital cycles. So the rights of nature frameworks giving personhood. Nature is not an object to be enslaved, but a subject, just like a human. And so, basically, we have to legislate and express in law our values as they evolve. And really, we should be teaching kind of the framework of Earth systems. People need to understand how the Earth functions, how the biosphere works, and how the Amazon is a vital organ of the biosphere, and those are and how the Amazon has enough to offer everyone. Everyone has the it gives us all enough to live if we continue to take care of her. And so we have to change people's paradigm of seeing the earth as alive and seeing themselves as productive cells in the body of this organism, the earth. And from the place of identity, we can shift consciousness to a point where we have more of us that get it. And we don't have to explain everything. They just have the right framework and the right worldview to see the living earth worldview.
I think this is a battle, this is a climate battle, and no one has to be left out. No one should be left out. And that's why we propose just transition, for this new world that we want to see: low carbon emissions, zero waste, net zero. But we need to make sure Black, Indigenous, Brown communities, migrant communities, LGBT communities have the right and the equitable part to be in this new world that we're reimagining, and how to make sure these policies and transition, when we talk about just transition and energy transition, we shouldn't leave anyone behind. And we need to educate people. We need to educate governments in how to support these communities that have been disproportionately affected in terms of like indigenous communities, brown communities, trans communities, LGBT communities, migrant worker communities. We need to make sure that we take them with us to this new world that we all are reimagining. And we should talk about racial justice and climate justice and everybody's justice, so we can all like enjoy this new world that we're trying to imagine, where we respect the rights of nature, we respect each other. Like as humans, as humanity, I think that should be the starting point. Respect yourself. By respecting yourself and your family, you're respecting your friends, your community, you're respecting nature. And I think that's going back to indigenous wisdom. I think that's what we are proposing. Stop extracting from nature, just give back, because that's your mother. That's where you need to, at the end of the day, go back to sleep, go and breathe the air, drink the water. And I think that's something that we need to think about for our everyday use and our everyday life and the way we want to see the world.
Win, win, win. Yeah, the idea that if you design, it's a design challenge. If we design the world that works for the most marginalized and the most left out, we will have designed the world that works for all.
I'm Tate Chamberlin. This is the Hatch Podcast Series. Atosa, Leo, thanks so much for your time and being here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
There is no future without indigenous wisdom, asserts Cerda, in a sentiment as brief as it is definitive. And Soltani agrees. Those are the principles the modern world needs to really think about, and how to be good ancestors, and what's true wealth, and how, too, we recognize that the earth is a living system. She's alive. And in this living superorganism, we can be productive cells or we can be destructive cells. And that, ultimately, it's our common future. We've got to wake up or we all perish. But in a world so enamored with technology, with gadgets and gizmos aplenty, how do activists pull the Disney-inspired everything will work out in the end apathetic veil and incite action, now before it's too late? The answer seems to reside in an entire shift in perspective, ecologically, economically, and socially, away from an extractive insistence and towards a regenerative ethos, one that, in its most profound and impactful iteration, results from the marriage of the most unlikely of bedfellows, cutting-edge innovation and ancient wisdom. We need to see ourselves not as separate from, but inherent to the life and livelihood of the living, breathing organism that is our planet. We need technologies and energy consumption solutions that simultaneously support society and the earth. And as important as any frontline efforts, we need to ensure that the people we elect lead with proactive policy change that ensures against the inevitable backslide of politics. Finally, we need to consider the very real outcome if we don't, not just for some, but for everyone. If we design the world that works for the most marginalized and the most left out, says Soltani, we will have designed the world that works for all. What a wonderful world that might be, indeed.
It seems now more than ever that we have found ourselves on the cusp of monumental worldwide change. Whether we consider the environment, politics, infrastructure, health, economics, or inequities across a broad swath of social constructs, the consensus is clear and urgent. All is not as it should be. The United Nations, a consortium of 193 member states from around the globe, agrees. In 2015, the UN unanimously adopted the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs. These goals call for urgent action in global partnership to secure peace and prosperity for people and the planet, now and into the future.
In alignment with the SDGs, Hatch, a curated network of artists, activists, and entrepreneurs working together to accelerate positive global change, has partnered with I Am Interchange to fuse adventure journalism with experiential design labs to develop innovative solutions to complex global challenges. This episode was produced by Yara Craner, Susan Karstensen, and me, Tate Chamberlin. A shout out to our media and production team, Jessica Byerly, Darko Sevilla, Kevin Hilton, Raymond Onsatagi, Sean Mackinson, and Mark Groner. A special thanks to Yara Craner, Anya Bulis, Jared Silverman, Pete Strom, Eitan Shapira, and Rachel Hicks. With so much gratitude to the Hatch supporters, Steelcase, the Kauffman Foundation, the Gwydion Fund, Envision Equality, the Hatch volunteers, board of directors, Hatch Guardians, and the community who help make this work and mission possible. To learn more about Hatch, visit hatchexperience.org. Building community could not happen without food. And with that, I'd like to thank Whistle Pig Korean, Red Tractor Pizza, and Zocalo Coffee House. Do you have an issue that's riddled by gridlock in your community? Shoot me an email at tate@iaminterchange.org. That's tate@iaminterchange.org. Remember, share airtime and don't ruin dinner.